You're holding position. The situation is stable. Tonight's military sci-fi story moves carefully and quietly, perfect for sleep. I remember the ring by its sound, not its shape. A station that large should have had a clean hum power routed in stable loops, pumps turning like a heart that never thinks about itself. This one groaned. Metal didn't just creak. It complained in long, tired notes that traveled through my boots and up my bones, like the structure was trying to tell us where it hurt. We came in on the shadow side because the bright side had too much debris and too many eyes. The fleet called it a salvage perimeter. The paperwork called it an industrial incident. The air outside the airlocks had a thin, glittering haze where it shouldn't have been. Particles catching starlight and making it look almost calm. Inside, nothing was calm. The fog in the corridors wasn't water vapor. It tasted like batteries even through the suit filter, a metallic sourness that sat behind the tongue. I was a sapper detail. That meant I carried tools that were supposed to cut, anchor, and fix, and I carried them into places where fixing was already too late. My suit was rated for vacuum and chemical exposure, but ratings are optimistic by nature. You can print a number on a plate and pretend it is armor. The objective had been given to us in a sterile format. Enter the service spine, reach the cracked heat exchanger chamber, emplace thermal sink pylons, and stabilize heat flow long enough for the external cutters to open a bypass corridor. If we did that, the remaining power loops wouldn't cascade. If we did not, the ring's core would dump its heat into the ocean below in a single violent release, flash boiling a hemisphere and throwing so much vapor into orbit that the fleet would lose sensors, approach lanes, and any hope of controlling the region. It would turn into a blind war. The bloom was the other part. An engineered maintenance organism, originally meant to crawl into tight spaces and eat corrosion, had been forced into a pattern it was never built to survive. Sabotage had broken the station's logic. The bloom adapted. It always adapts, because adaptation is what we bred into it. It started converting everything into heat and poison, metal, sealant, insulation, human tissue. The word gray was an understatement. Under lights, it looked like wet ash. In darkness, it glimmered faintly, as if it still remembered being a tool. I did not speak to anyone. We didn't do that in the spine. The comms were jammed by the bloom's own interference, tiny electrical storms in its structure. Even if the radios had worked, talking would have cost breath, and breath had a number attached to it. My oxygen counter started high. It dropped the way all counters drop when you watch them. It didn't matter how much you had. Watching it made you feel poorer. We moved through an access hatch that had been cut open from the outside. The edges were still warm, the metal curled like peeled skin. Beyond it was the service spine, a long artery beneath the ring's habdecks, designed for maintenance bots and technicians, not armored sappers. Coolant slush filled it in places, knee-deep, then waist-deep, then suddenly nothing, where a vent had eaten the floor away into vacuum and the slush hung in slow drifting chunks. I tethered myself by habit. Tethers are a kind of faith. The line ran from my belt to an anchor I couldn't see behind me anymore. I pulled it taut and kept it that way because loose lines snag, and snags kill. The first bodies we passed were frozen where they had tried to crawl. They were maintenance staff by their thin work suits, their helmets cracked. The bloom had touched them, and there were dark stains where the organism had cooked through their seals. Their faces were visible through frost expressions flattened by cold. Fear looks stupid once it's frozen. It becomes a mask you don't recognize. I stepped around them. My boot left a soft print in slush that didn't hold shape. The station trembled once, a deep shift, and the print filled with gray water. We found bloom residue on the walls like smear marks. It had traveled here. It had fed here. In places, it had peeled insulation off cables and left bare copper that looked too clean, like a bone. The smell in my suit thickened as the filter strained. A light on my left forearm blinked amber, then steady amber. Not yet red. Not yet. The first active mass showed itself as heat. My visor display painted a shape in dull colors, an irregular pile where there shouldn't have been one. It clung to a junction box like a growth. The coolant around it steamed faintly, and the air shimmered. The balloon didn't move like an animal. It moved like a problem spreading. A slow creep, a tiny heave, an exhale. I did what procedure told me. I shut down all unnecessary suit functions, lowered my profile, killed my lamp. Darkness is not concealment from something that senses heat and vibration, but it buys seconds. I moved with small steps, keeping my mass centered. The tether line whispered through a guide ring on my hip. A drone woke. It wasn't a sleek combat platform. It was station security. Old, cheap, hardened for riots and sabotage. Not for this. Its lens assembly rotated, and a pale cone of light cut through the corridor. The drone did not announce itself. It did not warn. Warnings are for systems that expect compliance. The drone's threat library had been corrupted by the cascade. It saw motion, heat, and unknown signatures. My suit's IFF transponder tried to handshake. The handshake failed. The drone angled toward me as if deciding. A small weapon mount unfolded from its underside. I did not shoot. Shooting would have fed vibration into the walls and called the bloom like a meal bell. I pulled the jammer from my chest mount and thumbed it on. It was weak by design, meant to fuzz sensors, not wage electronic war. The drone's light flickered. Its mount stuttered mid-deploy. For 3 seconds, it drifted as if confused. 3 seconds were enough for a lot of things. They were enough for me to get past the drone's cone and tuck into a maintenance niche. They were enough for the bloom to notice the drone. The bloom lifted a tendril, if you could call it that. A ribbon of gray matter stretched out like molten slag. It touched the drone's casing. The drone jerked once, the way a muscle reacts to pain. The bloom did not bite. It simply began converting. Heat surged. My suit's thermal warning pinged. The drone's casing softened, then blackened, then slumped. Toxic vapor curled into the corridor, thick and oily. My filter whined louder. The drone died without noise. That was the worst part. Machines die quietly. They don't bleed. They don't plead. They just stop. And the thing killing them keeps going. I moved on. The deeper we went, the more the station felt like a throat closing. Bulkheads buckled inward. Corridors narrowed. In a few places, the ceiling had collapsed and left jagged beams hanging, creating a maze of sharp edges that loved to catch suits. I patched 2 small tears with seal tape without stopping. The tape adhered with a faint crackle. I felt nothing about it. Feeling wastes oxygen. Somewhere above us, outside crews were cutting. Thousands of workers, conscript labor, contractors, anyone with debts, were running hull torches and brace rigs to open a bypass. They were the mass. We were the needle. The command liked to talk about redundancy, but this was not redundancy. This was desperation in 2 forms. A tremor ran through the spine again, stronger this time. Slush lifted off the floor in a slow wave, then settled. Dust drifted down like gray snow. My visor speckled. The route we were supposed to use. An old map in my display showed a junction ahead that would take us straight into the heat exchanger chamber. When we reached it, the junction was gone. The wall had sheared inward. A slab of bulkhead lay across the corridor, blocking it completely. Behind it, through a crack, I could see faint red glow, heat, alive and hungry. The map did not update. Maps never update in time. I changed direction into a side shaft. The shaft was narrower, lined with cable bundles and coolant pipes. Halfway in, the gravity shifted. My boots lost weight. The slush became floating spheres. I used the tether to pull myself forward hand over hand, careful not to jerk. Every motion in 0G is a conversation with momentum. At the end of the shaft was a hatch. The hatch had been melted open from the inside. The edges were fused, uneven. The bloom had been here. There were gray streaks like dried ash around the frame. I squeezed through. The chamber beyond was where heat lived. The heat exchanger core was a complex nest of pipes and fins designed to bleed energy into the station's radiators. Now, half of it was cracked open, and coolant poured in a constant, sluggish flow. The coolant should have been clear. It was cloudy with suspended gray matter. The bloom had gotten into it. Every drop carried it. Thermal sink pylons were heavy, ugly devices, dense composite columns with internal phase change material and anchor claws. They were designed for worst-case scenarios that planners insisted would never happen. I carried one strapped to my back like a coffin. I anchored myself to a pipe brace and began the emplacement procedure. Step 1. Find a stable mounting surface within specified distance of the crack. The surfaces were not stable. Everything vibrated with the station's suffering. I chose the least moving brace I could find. Step 2. Drill anchors. The drill's sound was muted by my suit, but vibration traveled. I kept torque low, took longer. Every second spent was oxygen spent. Every shortcut taken was death spent. The bloom responded to vibration the way insects respond to light. It didn't rush. It didn't swarm. It simply began moving toward the source as if drawn by a gradient. A shape rose from the coolant pool, a swelling of gray matter that carried heat in its center. It slid along a pipe, leaving a clean, wet trail. Where it touched metal, the metal darkened and softened. I did not panic. Panic is noisy. I finished drilling. I set the anchor bolts. I released the pylon from my back clamp and rotated it into place. The pylon's claws unfolded and bit into the brace with a dull thunk. I felt more than heard. A drone drifted into the chamber from above, drawn by motion. Its lens swung. It painted light across the coolant pool. The bloom's surface shimmered under the beam like oil. The drone's weapon mount deployed fully this time. It fired once. The round was not a bullet. It was a cutting slug designed to punch through cover. It struck a pipe behind me. The pipe ruptured, spraying coolant and gray matter into the chamber in a wide, slow arc. In microgravity pockets, the spray became a cloud of floating poison droplets. One droplet hit my visor. It sizzled faintly. The outer layer held. The inner layers stayed intact. My suit's contamination alarm rose from amber to a steady, demanding red. The drone fired again. Another pipe ruptured. The chamber filled with floating coolant spheres, each one reflecting my lamp's dim light like tiny eyes. The bloom didn't need eyes. It was everywhere. There was coolant. The pylon's indicator light turned from dark to dull green. It was absorbing heat. It was doing what it was built to do. It was not enough. The crack in the core still glowed like a wound. I moved to place the second pylon. My filter light blinked red now. The suit was eating poison and failing. I could taste it, metallic bitterness pushing through, faint but present. The suit's oxygen percentage was still acceptable. The air quality was not. I anchored again, drilled again. The bloom drew closer, not fast, but inevitable. It climbed pipes the way mold climbs walls, patient and sure. Where it went, the air shimmered with heat. The outside cutters made progress. I felt it as a distant vibration, rhythmic, heavy. Then I felt the consequence, a structural shift that made the brace I was anchoring into jump half a centimeter. In a chamber like this, half a centimeter was a knife twist. My drill bit snapped. It snapped inside the anchor hole, leaving jagged metal. I stared at it for a second too long, not because I was surprised, but because my brain was tallying options without emotion. Option 1, extract the broken bit. Time cost, high. Option 2, relocate the pylon mount. Time cost, moderate. Option 3, improvise with fewer anchors. Risk, catastrophic. I chose option 2. I moved along the brace, found a new surface, drilled slower. The bloom was closer now, its gray mass rising higher out of the coolant pool, stretching toward the brace like a reaching hand. The drone's light swept again. Its threat library still saw me. The jammer was dead. Its internal coil had overheated. I watched the drone's mount align and felt nothing. I was already inside the problem. Fear would not change the math. It fired. The round hit the pylon I had already placed. The pylon's outer casing cracked, exposing phase change material that steamed instantly. Heat spiked. My visor flashed warnings. The pylon stayed anchored. It kept absorbing heat, but now it was damaged, and damage meant it would fail sooner. I finished anchoring the second pylon and locked it in. Green light. Heat flow shifted. The crack's glow dulled slightly, not healed, just less angry. There was supposed to be a third. My oxygen counter hit the threshold where procedure said to turn back. Procedure did not account for a third pylon. Procedure assumed the core would be stable by then. Procedure had been written by people who would never walk here. I pulled the third pylon from a cache pack in the chamber, left by the team that came before us, and did not leave. The pack was half submerged in coolant. The straps were stiff with frost. I freed it and felt the weight drag at my shoulders. The bloom touched my boot. It was not dramatic. It was a smear against the sole, like stepping in mud. Then heat surged up through the boot's insulation. My foot went numb. The suit's temperature warning screamed. I kicked, slow and controlled, and the bloom peeled away in a stringy ribbon, leaving behind a softened patch of boot material that smoked faintly. Chemical alarms stacked on my display like accusations. I anchored the third pylon. The drone fired again. The round grazed my left arm. The suit didn't tear, but the impact bruised deep. Pain registered as a distant fact, like a line item. I locked the third pylon in place. All three lights were green. For a moment, the chamber's glow stabilized. The crack in the exchanger core dimmed from red to a dull orange. The coolant stopped boiling. The air shimmer lessened. The bloom still moved, but slower, as if deprived of a meal. The pylons were pulling heat into themselves, buying time. Time was all we were ever sent to buy. Extraction did not come immediately. It never does. I started back through the shaft. My tether line pulled tight as I climbed into partial gravity. The corridor beyond was worse than before. The structural shift had collapsed more ceiling. Slush was deeper. The air tasted sharper through the failing filter. I passed the frozen bodies again. One of them had moved, not by life, by gravity shift. It lay face down now, fingers outstretched into slush, as if still trying. A new drone drifted overhead. Its lens swept. It paused on me. Its mount did not deploy. Its threat library may have been overloaded, or maybe the bloom's heat had confused it. I did not care why. I kept moving. When I reached the cut hatch, I saw the outside corridor the cutters had opened, a rough tunnel through hull layers and bracing, lined with fresh scorch marks and melted insulation. Workers had died there too. Their bodies were stacked in a corner, zipped into gray bags, treated as obstructions removed from a path. I exited into a staging compartment where gravity was stable and air was cleaner. A decon mist sprayed my suit. The mist burned faintly where my neck seal had been compromised. My skin under it felt raw. Hands guided me without touching. Robotic arms, remote clamps. Humans kept distance. Distance was protocol now. I was moved into quarantine. Quarantine is a soft word. It suggests care. It suggests waiting. In practice, it was storage. They put me in a narrow pod with a clear front panel and fed air through filters that smelled of plastic. My suit was peeled away by machines. The first breath of unfiltered station air hit my throat like a wet rag. It was cleaner than the spine, but it carried the same metallic bite. My skin was mottled with chemical burns. My left foot had a patch of pale flesh where the boot insulation had failed. The pain was present now, but it was still distant, a background hum. Medical scans ran. Numbers appeared. Numbers always appear. I was told nothing. There was no voice, no reassurance, just screens changing and lights blinking. Outside the pod, officials in sealed suits moved through observation corridors. They watched through glass. They took notes. They did not meet my eyes. I could see their faces behind visors, tired, careful, already elsewhere. Days passed, or hours. Time in quarantine is measured by injection schedules and light cycles. The false stability came on the third day. My burns looked less angry. My breathing felt easier. My foot's numbness receded. I could stand for brief periods without the room spinning. The med readouts shifted toward green. Someone might have called it recovery. I knew better. I had seen the same curve in other incidents, the body's last clean lie before it fails. The bloom did not just burn, it rewrote. I recorded this because recording is what I have left. The terminal in my pod is meant for compliance checklists, symptom reporting, authorization acknowledgements, incident statements that fit into pre-approved boxes. I use it for this instead. Outside, I can see through 2 layers of glass into a corridor where sealed containers are being moved. Evidence crates, black cases with tamper seals. A technician scans them and routes them toward a locked lift. The lift goes down, toward cold storage, toward archives that are never opened. I understand what happens to archives in this kind of war. They become burial. The station's core is stable now, on paper. The pylons bought time. The bypass corridor let heat bleed away. The ring didn't flash boil the ocean. The fleet kept its sensors. The region stayed navigable. The report will call it a heroic containment operation. It will list casualties as necessary. It will mention sabotage only in abstract. It will not mention design. It will not mention how the station's systems failed in a way that required human bodies to fill the gap. My organs begin to fail tonight. I can feel it as a heaviness behind the ribs. My urine is dark. My hands tremble when I lift them. The med readouts have not turned red yet, but they will. They always lag behind what the body knows. If I stop recording, the incident becomes simple. Simple is what command prefers. Simple fits into the next budget request. Simple is survivable for the institution. The truth is not survivable. The truth is always treated as contamination. I think about the chamber where the bloom touched my boot, and how it did it without malice, without hunger in any human sense. It was built to seek corrosion and heat and fix problems by consuming them. It did what it was made to do. Only the definition of problem had been bent by sabotage and by design choices that assumed expendable lives. I think about the drones cutting slugs, rupturing pipes, and spraying poison into the air. The drone did what it was made to do, too. It protected assets by destroying threats. It could not recognize the difference between a threat and a repair. People like to say machines fail. People like to say systems break. What I saw was systems functioning exactly as configured when stress revealed their true priorities. The last thing I remember clearly from the spine is not the bloom or the drone or the crack glowing orange. It is condensation beads forming on the inside of my visor as my breath cooled, and the beads trembling with each distant cutter from the outside cruise. The beads looked like small planets on glass. They shook, held, and then merged into a thin line of water that slid downward, slow, steady, unstoppable, like everything else on that ring. The false stability breaks without drama. It is not a sudden collapse. There is no alarm that means anything. The monitors stay polite, the lights keep their schedule. My chest tightens as if a strap has been cinched one notch too far, then another. Breathing becomes a manual task, like moving through slush. Each inhale tastes more metallic than the last, a penny held under the tongue too long. I keep recording because stopping would feel like agreeing. My vision narrows at the edges. The pod's glass fogs where my breath hits it, then clears as the air exchange compensates. The system is still doing its job. That is the problem. The system never stops. Through the glass, I see a figure pause at a junction and glance toward my pod. They do not come closer. They wait for a status indicator to change color. It does not. They move on. The pain arrives late. It is deep and dull, not sharp. It spreads from behind the sternum and down into the abdomen, a heavy warmth that does not belong there. My hands are steady enough to type, but my fingers feel thick, as if wrapped in gloves that are a size too small. I think about the pylons. I picture them anchored into the brace, green lights steady, pulling heat into themselves. I know how they fail. The phase change material saturates, the casing cracks further, and the green goes to amber, then red. Maintenance teams will replace them in shifts, rotating bodies through the chamber the way we rotate filters. The bloom will be thinned, not destroyed. It will be boxed, labeled, studied, then quietly repurposed somewhere else with improved safeguards and the same assumptions. I think about the workers in the bypass corridor, stacked in bags to clear a path. Their names will be counted once. Their families will receive messages that use words like incident and service. The messages will not mention heat curves or threat libraries. My breathing stutters. I slow it consciously, the way training teaches, even though training cannot fix chemistry. Each breath feels heavier than the last. The room tilts slightly, then rights itself. The terminal blinks, asking for confirmation that I am fit to continue quarantine. I ignore it. There is a smell now that is not metal. It is sweet, faint, like coolant warmed too long. It comes from me. My heart rate drops on the display. The system adjusts airflow again, trying to help. It cannot filter blood. The last clear sensation I have is pressure in my ears, as if the station has decided to deepen its gravity just for me. I swallow. It does nothing. Outside the pod, the corridor lights dim for a scheduled cycle. The station groans, a long, tired sound that I felt earlier in my boots and now feel behind my eyes. It is the same sound. It has always been the same sound. I keep my eyes open until they won't stay open. If this recording survives, it will be because someone missed a file, or because burying everything costs more than burying most of it. If it does not, the ring will still turn, the ocean below will stay liquid, and the fleet will keep moving. That will be called success. The terminal cursor blinks once more, patient, waiting for input I no longer have. The last thing I notice is condensation forming again on the inside of the glass, beads trembling with the station's distant work, then joining and sliding downward in the thin line that never breaks. The end. The narrative powers down completely. Everything essential stays on, everything else fades away. You're safe to sleep now.